January 1943. The island of Guadalcanal was no longer a paradise. It was rot. Humidity thick enough to drown in, mud that swallowed boots whole, and an enemy you rarely saw but always felt. 3 days, 14 Americans dead. Not in open battle, not in a charge, but one at a time. A shot from the trees, a man drops. Silence. The killings happened west of Point Cruz, a stretch of shattered palms and broken structures where Japanese snipers had turned the jungle into a hunting ground. Every patrol that moved through the coconut groves felt it, eyes watching, crosshairs waiting. The Japanese had mastered concealment. They climbed trees, built platforms high in the canopy, wrapped themselves in leaves. They did not fire wildly. They fired once, and they killed. The American response? More firepower. Standard doctrine emphasized speed and suppression. Infantry units relied on the semi-automatic power of the M1 Garand. 8 rounds of 30-06, rapid follow-up shots, overwhelming force. The theory was simple. More bullets meant more dominance. But in the groves near Point Cruz, more bullets meant nothing, because you can't suppress what you can't see. Into this tension stepped a young officer, John George, 2nd Lieutenant, 132nd Infantry Regiment. He was not loud, not flamboyant, not a decorated war hero, yet. But he carried something that made him stand out immediately. Not the standard-issue rifle, not the weapon the Army trusted. He carried a civilian hunting rifle, a Winchester Model 70, bolt action, slow, 5 rounds, wood stock, slim barrel. And mounted on top, something even more controversial, a Lyman Alaskan scope, glass, magnification, precision. To some officers, it looked impressive. To most, it looked ridiculous. They called it a mail-order sweetheart, a sporting toy, a deer rifle brought to a war. One captain reportedly told him to leave it in his tent and carry a real weapon. Because in 1943, the U.S. Army did not believe wars were won by individual marksmen. They were won by coordinated firepower, by squad tactics, by volume. A single precise rifle? That belonged in the woods back home, not in modern mechanized warfare. But George had a different idea. He had grown up hunting. He understood something the manuals didn't emphasize. A bolt-action rifle forces discipline. You don't spray. You don't rush. You breathe. You steady. You break the trigger clean. And most importantly, you hit what you aim at. The Winchester Model 70 was not built for trench charges. It was built for tight groupings at distance. At 300 yards, its shots clustered closer than the standard service rifle. Its trigger was smoother. Its barrel harmonics more consistent. The M1 Garand was revolutionary, yes, but in a sniper duel, rate of fire is irrelevant if your first shot misses. And that was the unspoken problem near Point Cruz. American soldiers were firing back toward muzzle flashes, toward movement, toward suspicion. The Japanese snipers were firing at certainty. One shot, one casualty. Every time. A man stood to move supplies. Every time a helmet crested a ridge. Every time a careless silhouette appeared against the sky. 14 deaths in 72 hours. Morale was sinking. Men were hugging cover longer. Movement slowed. Confidence eroded. The battalion didn't need more noise. It needed someone who could see. And that is where the real divide appeared. Doctrine said, suppress and advance. George believed, observe and eliminate. He would lie still for hours, study the tree line, watch for unnatural shadows.
He wasn't hunting an army, he was hunting a single patient predator. Other officers saw inefficiency. They saw a lieutenant separated from his men, moving cautiously instead of aggressively. They saw a rifle that cycled slower. What they did not see was what George saw through that glass. Details, a slight bend in palm fronds, a darker patch against bark, a flicker of reflected light. The scope changed everything. It turned chaos into geometry, angles, lines, distance. Where others saw jungle, George saw patterns. But before he could prove anything, he had to endure the ridicule, because military culture is not kind to deviation. The U.S. Army in World War II valued uniformity. Standardization saved logistics. It simplified training. It built cohesion. Individual improvisation? That was often seen as ego. So when George insisted on carrying his Winchester into operations, he wasn't just challenging equipment preference, he was challenging philosophy. Was war won by systems or by skill? Was superiority measured in rounds per minute or in hits per opportunity? In the humid stillness of Guadalcanal in January 1943, these questions were no longer academic, they were lethal. Each sniper round that cracked through the trees was a reminder that something wasn't working. Men began to notice something else, too. When George fired, someone usually fell. His shots were deliberate, rare, but different. The sound of a bolt cycling after a confirmed hit carries a certain finality. Clack, chamber, silence. Even skeptics began watching, not because they believed in his rifle, but because they were running out of answers. What none of them realized yet was that the debate unfolding in those groves would echo far beyond Guadalcanal. It would challenge the assumption that semi-automatic meant superior. It would reintroduce the Army to an old truth. In a sniper duel, speed is noise, precision is dominance, and sometimes the weapon that looks outdated is exactly the one the battlefield demands. Innovation rarely announces itself with applause. It arrives quietly, carried by someone willing to be laughed at. On Guadalcanal in January 1943, a young lieutenant with a so-called mail-order toy was about to prove that doctrine can be wrong, and the jungle was about to become his proving ground. The ridicule would not last long, but the lesson would.
January 22, 1943. Dawn breaks slowly over Guadalcanal. The sky is gray. The air is thick. Humidity clings to the skin like a second uniform. And somewhere west of Point Cruz, someone is watching. For 72 hours, Japanese snipers have owned these coconut groves. 14 American soldiers, 14 single shots, 14 bodies carried out under silence. No warning, no firefight, just a crack through the trees and a man collapsing into the dirt. The jungle isn't loud here, it's patient. And this morning, that patience is about to be tested. Second Lieutenant John George moves carefully into position among shattered ruins and broken palms. He does not carry the standard rifle of the American infantry. He carries something the others mocked, a Winchester Model 70. Bolt action, 5 rounds, no rapid fire. Mounted on top, a Lyman Alaskan scope, glass instead of guesswork. While others think in volleys, George thinks in angles. He lies flat. He doesn't move. 5 minutes pass, then 15, an hour. The jungle breathes around him. Insects hum. Leaves hang motionless. Most men grow impatient after 10 minutes. Snipers grow dangerous after 60. George studies patterns, not movement, patterns.
The Japanese snipers from the Imperial Japanese Army are masters of concealment. They build platforms high in palm trees, wrap themselves in foliage, remain still for hours. They do not waste ammunition. They fire when they are certain. And certainty is what George is hunting. Then, something subtle. A palm frond trembles without wind. Too controlled, too deliberate. Through the Lyman scope, the jungle shifts from chaos to geometry. Lines sharpen, shadows separate. He scans slowly. There, a darker patch against bark. Not bark, cloth. A cheekbone barely visible. At that exact moment, a rifle cracks somewhere to his left. Another American goes down. The sniper is active. The duel has begun. George does not rush. A semi-automatic rifle like the M1 Garand could send 8 rounds down range in seconds, but speed is meaningless if the first shot misses. He exhales slowly, applies steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle bucks. A single shot echoes. High in the palm tree, a shape convulses, then falls. Silence returns. The first counter-sniper kill. No cheering, no shouting, just stillness. But something has changed. The Americans feel it. The jungle is no longer one-sided. Day 2. The Japanese reposition. They understand now. Someone is hunting back. George shifts his approach. A skilled sniper never fires twice from the same location, so he doesn't just look up, he looks everywhere. Ground shadows, fallen logs, root systems. 2 hours pass. Nothing. 3 hours. Then he notices something unnatural at the base of a coconut tree. Freshly disturbed soil. A small mound where there should be none. He adjusts the scope. A faint metallic reflection, the slightest glint of sunlight off a rifle barrel. At that exact second, the Japanese sniper sees him too. 2 scopes, 2 men, 2 breaths held. This is not about who fires faster. It's about who remains calmer. George doesn't blink. The other sniper hesitates just slightly, and hesitation is fatal. 1 clean trigger break. Another body slumps into the dirt. 2 days, 2 confirmed kills, but the psychological balance is shifting. Day 3. Word spreads quietly among the Americans. If George is watching, we're safer. Morale begins to recover. But the Japanese adapt again. They deploy decoys, hats placed in branches, false movement meant to draw fire. A less disciplined shooter would empty a magazine at shadows. George waits, because with a bolt-action rifle, every round is a decision. He studies one suspicious cluster of leaves for nearly 2 hours. Nothing. Then, the smallest movement. Not a branch, not fabric. An eye. Just a fraction of a second. Enough. He fires. The 3rd Japanese sniper falls, and with that shot, something invisible fractures. The myth of invincibility. Day 4. This is no longer just counterfire. This is psychological warfare. The Japanese snipers now know climbing high into palms means death. They know someone is scanning with glass, someone patient, someone precise. George has entered their rhythm and disrupted it. Throughout the day, he identifies multiple concealed positions, one by one, measured, controlled, final. By the end of the 4th day, 11 Japanese snipers are confirmed killed. 11, each with a single deliberate shot. No wild exchanges, no suppression fire, just surgical elimination. The coconut groves grow quieter. Supply lines reopen. American soldiers begin moving with confidence again. The oppressive fear that gripped Point Cruz begins to lift. And, perhaps most importantly, the laughter stopped. No one called the Winchester a toy anymore. No one questioned the scope, because in 4 days, one officer with a so-called mail-order rifle accomplished what volleys of semi-automatic fire could not. He proved something that doctrine had overlooked. In a sniper duel, volume is noise, precision is power. The M1 Garand was a revolutionary infantry weapon, but in the vertical chessboard of jungle sniping, speed was secondary. Clarity won, patience won, discipline won, and in the ruins west of Point Cruz, a new understanding was born. You don't defeat a hidden marksman with more bullets. You defeat him by seeing him first. 4 days, 11 snipers, one rifle that wasn't supposed to belong in modern war. The debate about doctrine wasn't over, but in the coconut groves of Guadalcanal, the results were undeniable. Precision answered firepower, and the jungle had chosen its victor.
The United States Army in 1943 believed it had solved the problem of infantry warfare. The answer was speed. The answer was firepower. The answer was the semi-automatic rifle. The M1 Garand was not just a weapon, it was a symbol. 8 rounds of .30-06, rapid follow-up shots, a technological leap ahead of most bolt-action service rifles in the world. General officers praised it. Training manuals centered around it. Infantry doctrine depended on it. The philosophy was simple. More rounds downrange meant more dominance. More dominance meant victory. And on open battlefields, that logic often worked. But the coconut groves of Guadalcanal were not open battlefields. They were vertical battlefields. Tight sight lines, limited visibility, engagement distances stretching beyond 300 yards through narrow windows in foliage. This was not a contest of suppression. This was a contest of detection. And that changed everything. In theory, a semi-automatic rifle should always win against a bolt action. Faster cycling, more rounds ready, quicker correction after a miss. But theory assumes something dangerous. It assumes the first shot misses. In a sniper duel, that assumption is fatal, because when 2 trained marksmen locate each other, whoever lands the first accurate shot usually ends the engagement. There is rarely a second opportunity. Second Lieutenant John George understood something that wasn't emphasized in doctrine. Accuracy is not just mechanical, it is psychological. A bolt-action rifle like the Winchester Model 70 forces the shooter into a rhythm of control. You cannot rush the bolt without disturbing your sight picture. You cannot spray without breaking position. You cannot rely on volume to compensate for nerves. Every shot becomes deliberate, and deliberate shooting produces discipline. At 300 yards, grouping matters more than speed. The Winchester's tighter grouping meant something critical: confidence. When George pressed the trigger, he trusted where that bullet would land. That trust changes how a man breathes. It changes how long he waits. It changes whether he panics. But there was another factor doctrine underestimated: optics. Bellyman Alaskan was not standard infantry equipment. Many officers viewed scopes as fragile, unnecessary, even impractical in jungle humidity. Iron sights were considered reliable and sufficient, but iron sights require exposure. To see clearly at distance, a shooter often needs to elevate his head, adjust posture, and risk silhouette. A scope allows something different: minimal movement, greater clarity, extended observation. Through magnified glass, chaos becomes structure. Through magnified glass, camouflage has limits, and in the Pacific Theater, those limits began to show. After the 4-day counter-sniper fight near Point Cruz, conversations began shifting quietly among officers, not publicly, not officially, but privately. Why had one lieutenant with a civilian rifle neutralized 11 enemy snipers, while platoons with standard rifles struggled? The answer was uncomfortable.
because it suggested doctrine was incomplete. The Army trained men to fire in coordinated bursts, to advance under covering fire, to think in squads and units. But a sniper duel is not a squad engagement. It is intimate, it is mathematical, it is patient, and it rewards individuals, not formations. The Japanese forces of the Imperial Japanese Army had invested heavily in individual concealment and patience. Their snipers operated alone or in pairs. They were trained to wait for certainty. The American response had initially been collective: return fire, suppression, area dominance. But suppression does not intimidate a hidden sniper. It reveals your position. George's approach flipped the equation. He did not try to dominate space. He tried to dominate information. See first, identify first, fire once. That shift from firepower to information control was subtle but revolutionary. The myth of semi-automatic superiority began to crack, not because the Garand failed, but because context matters. In close-quarters assault, speed wins. In defensive lines, volume wins. But in a hidden duel across 300 yards of filtered jungle light, clarity wins. Breath control wins. Trigger discipline wins. The battlefield had exposed a truth textbooks had simplified. Technology is only superior within the conditions it was designed for. Outside those conditions still becomes the deciding factor. Reports from Guadalcanal began circulating through the regiment. Other officers experimented quietly. Scoped rifles appeared in more hands. Marksmen were given greater freedom to operate independently. Not officially, not yet, but the culture was shifting. The idea that every infantryman should rely solely on rapid semi-automatic fire began to evolve. The Pacific Theater was teaching lessons Europe had not. Dense jungle does not reward noise, it rewards patience, and patience cannot be mass-produced. Perhaps the most important lesson wasn't about rifles at all, it was about authority. When Captain Morris had dismissed George's Winchester as a mail-order sweetheart, he was defending standardization. Standardization keeps armies efficient, but innovation keeps them alive. The Army had not forbidden George from carrying his rifle. It had simply doubted him, and doubt can be as limiting as regulation. What Guadalcanal proved was this: doctrine must serve reality, not the other way around. Reality had spoken in the coconut groves 11 times. In the years that followed, sniper programs would expand. Scoped bolt-action rifles would return to prominence in specialized roles. Marksmanship would once again be treated not just as a baseline skill, but as an elite craft. But in early 1943, none of that was guaranteed. It took a young lieutenant willing to endure ridicule, willing to trust his experience, willing to challenge the assumption that faster always means better. The Army believed the future belonged to semi-automatic speed. Guadalcanal revealed that the future still had room for precision. And sometimes the experts are wrong, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack context. War is the ultimate auditor of theory, and in the jungles of Guadalcanal, theory had just been audited. The verdict? Firepower dominates battles, but precision decides duels. And in the Pacific Theater, that distinction would save countless lives.
Innovation in war rarely begins with permission. It begins with survival. By early 1943, the fighting on Guadalcanal was shifting. The island would soon be secured, but the lessons learned there were just beginning to travel. What happened west of Point Cruz did not arrive in Washington as a headline. It traveled the way most battlefield truths do, quietly, from officer to officer, from platoon to platoon, from whispered conversation to field adjustment. Give your best shot to your best marksman. Find him a scope. Let him work alone. There was no official memo declaring a doctrinal revolution. There was only evidence. 11 enemy snipers eliminated in 4 days by one man, John George, using a civilian bolt-action rifle. The implications were unavoidable. The Pacific theater was unlike Europe. The distances were deceptive, the terrain vertical, the enemy concealed above, below, and everywhere between. Standard infantry formations often struggled to identify sniper threats until it was too late. But George's method introduced a different concept, counter-sniping as a specialized task. Not return fire, not suppression, hunting. Other units began adapting. Soldiers with exceptional marksmanship records were quietly given priority access to scoped rifles, sometimes standard military variants, sometimes privately owned hunting rifles. The semi-automatic M1 Garand remained dominant for general infantry use, but alongside it, something re-emerged, the deliberate rifleman. Bolt-action platforms like the Winchester Model 70, once dismissed as outdated, started appearing more frequently in the hands of carefully selected shooters. It wasn't about replacing doctrine, it was about refining it. And then came the ripple effect. As operations expanded across the Solomon Islands and deeper into the Pacific, commanders faced the same problem repeatedly. Hidden snipers disrupting supply lines, delaying advances, eroding morale. Instead of reacting with volume, some battalion leaders began assigning designated counter-snipers, men trained not just to shoot, but to observe. Hours of stillness, understanding shadow behavior, recognizing unnatural patterns in foliage. The skill set expanded beyond trigger control. It became about information dominance. And information dominance reduced casualties. Supply routes opened faster. Forward observers operated with greater confidence. Patrols moved with less hesitation. No official statistic recorded how many lives were saved because a hidden sniper was eliminated before he could fire, but estimates from field reports suggested the impact was enormous. One effective counter-sniper could prevent dozens of deaths over weeks of operations. Multiply that across multiple islands, multiple regiments, multiple campaigns. The number climbs rapidly, not hundreds, thousands. There was another transformation taking place, respect. The same officers who once dismissed scopes as fragile luxuries began requesting them. The same leaders who prioritized rate of fire began asking about grouping performance at 300 yards. The culture was evolving, not abandoning firepower, but balancing it. The lesson was clear. Volume controls territory. Precision controls fear. And fear was a weapon the Japanese sniper had wielded effectively, until someone took it away. Across the Pacific, branches of the United States military began formalizing what had once been improvised. The United States Marine Corps had already experimented with scoped rifles earlier in the war. Now, experience reinforced the necessity. Scoped bolt-action rifles were no longer seen as nostalgic relics. They were specialized instruments, tools for specific problems. The distinction mattered, because war punishes generalization. What works in one theater fails in another, and the Pacific demanded adaptation. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this innovation was that it began unofficially. No committee approved it, no procurement board demanded it. A lieutenant trusted his experience, a battlefield validated it, commanders observed the results, and behavior changed. This is how real military evolution happens, not in theory alone, but in friction. By mid-war, sniper training began receiving more structured attention. Observation techniques were emphasized, camouflage discipline intensified, fieldcraft became as important as marksmanship. The philosophy George embodied, patience over panic,
Certainty over speed began influencing instruction. What started as a ridiculed mail-order rifle incident had grown into something far larger, a reminder. Armies must adapt faster than their enemies, and adaptation often begins at the lowest levels. But there was one more lesson: trust. Trusting skilled individuals to operate independently, trusting expertise over conformity, trusting results over assumptions. Because if George had obeyed the ridicule, if he had left the Winchester in his tent, if he had surrendered to standardization, the coconut groves might have remained silent killing fields far longer. Innovation often looks like defiance before it looks like wisdom, and in war, hesitation to adapt can be fatal. The Pacific theater would continue to evolve: new islands, new terrain, new challenges. But the principle discovered on Guadalcanal endured. You cannot outshoot what you cannot see. You cannot suppress what you cannot detect. And sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is not the fastest, it is the most precise. What began as a private decision by John George became a quiet shift in mindset across an entire theater of war. No parade marked the change, no headline announced it. But thousands of soldiers moved through jungles with greater confidence, because somewhere nearby a patient rifleman was watching, and watching in the Pacific meant surviving.
War moves on. Islands fall. Front lines shift. New battles replace old ones. By February 1943, the campaign for Guadalcanal was effectively over. But some battles don't end when the shooting stops. They echo. What happened in the coconut groves west of Point Cruz did more than eliminate 11 enemy snipers. It challenged an assumption. And assumptions, once broken, rarely return unchanged. The U.S. military entered World War II believing that speed and volume defined modern infantry superiority. The semi-automatic M1 Garand represented progress, and it was progress. But progress is not universal. It is contextual. The Pacific Theater forced the Army and the United States Marine Corps to confront a reality Europe did not fully present. Precision could not be replaced by firepower. It had to coexist with it. In the years following World War II, sniper programs did not explode overnight, but they matured. Lessons from the Pacific were studied. Field reports were analyzed. After-action reflections were debated. The idea of the dedicated sniper, trained, equipped, and empowered to operate independently, gained renewed legitimacy. Bolt-action rifles, once considered outdated by some, remained central to sniper roles. Why? Because mechanical simplicity offers consistency. Consistency builds trust, and trust under pressure is everything. The spirit embodied by the Winchester Model 70 on Guadalcanal carried forward into future rifle designs, not because it was civilian, but because it was precise. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, rugged terrain and long sight lines once again rewarded deliberate marksmanship. In Vietnam, dense jungle returned the battlefield to vertical complexity, eerily similar to the coconut groves of 1943. Snipers became essential. Optics improved. Training expanded. The philosophy evolved. See first, shoot once, end it. Modern U.S. sniper doctrine emphasizes observation more than firing. Target detection is considered a primary skill, often more critical than trigger speed. That emphasis traces its lineage back through decades of battlefield experience. And somewhere in that lineage stands a lieutenant who refused to leave his hunting rifle behind. Today, modern sniper systems are engineered with advanced materials, precision machined barrels, and high magnification optics
far beyond the capabilities of the Lyman Alaskan. Ballistic computers assist calculations. Rangefinders provide instant distance. Wind meters eliminate guesswork. But even with all that technology, the core principles remain unchanged. Patience, discipline, first-round impact. Modern instructors still teach that the first shot is the one that matters most, because in a real engagement, there may never be a second. That truth was proven in 1943 under palm trees, not in laboratories. There is another legacy, one less discussed: leadership. Second Lieutenant John George did not wait for permission to innovate. He did not demand official endorsement. He acted based on experience, and when results came, leadership adapted. The ability of an organization to recognize effective deviation rather than punish it determines how quickly it evolves. Guadalcanal demonstrated that flexibility within structure saves lives. Rigid doctrine wins arguments. Adaptive doctrine wins wars. The story also reshaped how battalion commanders viewed individual excellence. World War I had emphasized mass formations. World War II began with industrial-scale warfare. But the Pacific reminded planners that a single skilled marksman could influence an entire sector. One sniper can halt supply lines. One counter-sniper can restore them. That asymmetry is powerful, and it forced military thinkers to reconsider how much impact one trained individual could have. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is psychological. Snipers don't just eliminate targets, they alter behavior. They slow movement. They create hesitation. They generate fear disproportionate to their numbers. By neutralizing Japanese snipers near Point Cruz, George didn't just remove 11 shooters. He removed 11 sources of psychological dominance. He restored initiative. And modern doctrine recognizes that counter-sniping is as much about morale as it is about casualty prevention. Today's military sniper schools emphasize fieldcraft, concealment, observation, patience, and independent decision-making. These values were not invented in 1943, but they were validated there. Validated in sweat. Validated in stillness. Validated by results. The rifle that officers once mocked as a mail-order sweetheart became symbolic of something larger: the courage to challenge assumptions. History often celebrates massive offensives and sweeping victories, carrier battles, armored breakthroughs, air superiority. But sometimes transformation begins in a much smaller space: a ruined structure, a coconut grove, a single man lying motionless for hours. War is loud, but evolution is quiet. The debate between firepower and precision never truly ends. Technology continues to evolve. Weapons become faster, more automated, more complex. Yet across every generation of conflict, one principle remains untouched: accuracy under pressure decides outcomes. On Guadalcanal in January 1943, that principle was not theorized, it was demonstrated 11 times. And the ripple of those 11 shots traveled farther than anyone present could have imagined. In the end, the legacy of the so-called mail-order rifle is not about wood stocks or bolt handles. It is about mindset. When everyone else believes louder is better, the disciplined few ask whether quieter might be deadlier. When doctrine becomes rigid, someone must test its limits. And when innovation is mocked, results become its defense. The jungle of Guadalcanal taught a modern army an ancient truth: skill outlasts fashion, precision outlasts speed, and sometimes the weapon that looks outdated is simply ahead of its time.